New Jersey college student diagnosed with cancer in her left thigh at 17.
There was no way I wasn't gonna just stay home and just be a vegetable.
Jessica was suffering from cancer in the left femur, just above the knee. The foot was still in good condition.
So doctors performed a rotation plasty on Jessica Martinez, attaching her lower leg to her thigh. Brace yourself for this image.
You have a foot that's upside down.
And that's her new knee.
That's her new knee.
I was like, there's no way. I was 17 years old. I was worried about my looks. I wasn't really, I was like, there's no way I can do that.
But Jessica did it, and her boyfriend stuck by her. We met the nursing student as she was ordering a foam cover for her prosthesis. She credits Valenti with making a device that helps her walk better.
He gave me a totally different one than what I had before.
This is a prosthesis we're making for a patient who had a rotation plasty. We happen to get a few of those this year. And it's a very interesting way to make it. First of all, we made the lower section first, removed it from the model, and then we'll block it up to make the thigh corset. Of course, you need a thigh corset with most rotation plasties, if not all of them, because of the nature of the ankle joint becoming a knee. Because the ankle joint offers medial lateral motion and other motions that the knee doesn't offer. The way we make it is with a silicone polyethylene thigh corset. And the thigh corset is only to give the patient medial lateral stability, okay? So there's no weight bearing on the thigh corset whatsoever. So if that's the case, you really don't need much for a thigh corset at all. In fact, these are the knee joints. They're just punched out of 3/16 copolymer, and we use them to make the axis between the socket and the thigh corset. These get molded in, and then we form the silicone polyethylene over it. But the way this is made is, if you notice these lines over here, you have to break this in half in order to do the project. But you want to make sure that you can align the two to assemble it. So what we do is cut it in half. When we're getting ready to mold the lower section, the foot section, we actually cut it in half, separate the thigh off the tibial section or the foot section with alignment lines, and then glue it back together to make the thigh corset. You see that cut mark? So what we do is draw the place where we want to have the cut, and it's above the joint axis, somewhere in here, but low. And then we just do is take a tape measure, before we cut it, take a tape measure, trace the tape measure over that, in the area where the cut mark is going to be, because that cut is going to plow out material that you want to maintain when you put it back together. So now when you stick it back together with the plaster, you line it up with the tape mark, and that will give you the distance you need to make sure that the thigh corset was exactly where it was when you cut it apart. Now I'm going to make the thigh corset, and of course these are the alignment lines to control the rotation or maintain the rotation. Now these lines here are the lines for the knee joints, or the ankle joints, whatever you want to call them. And the way to find the joint axis, this has been marked. If you notice, a flat spot was created over the malleoli to create a surface for the joint, because the socket itself will become the lowest section of the joint. It's just going to be a lap joint when it's finished. So this portion will be riveted right on here with a copper rivet and a Teflon bushing between, and it's amazing how long these last. They're very durable. You would think they wouldn't last at all, but they do. So that axis has been marked and drilled. So when we made the insert, it left an imprint for the joint axis, and I marked the imprint. So from the joint axis, what we do is find the location up the line so we know where it's going to land here to make sure everything is referenced. So what we did was measure 5 inches, put a tick mark, so we know 5 inches down along this line is going to give us the joint axis on both sides. That's just a way to reference it so you know where to place the knee joints at the end. We're going to now mold the thigh corset over this model, but we have to account for the thickness of the socket and the insert down here. So we're just going to put a block over that area to bring the joint out as far as we need so that it'll contour properly when it gets over the socket. And now we key in those nail holes with a rubber band just to hold that plate down, and then a clip nail to make sure that knee joints get on the axis. Alright, now we warm up the knee joints. One's lower than the other because the medial side, of course, you have to think about. Line it up with the joint. Get one. Very complicated, very difficult. And if you want, you could even vacuum them. But we're going to be vacuuming the socket anyway, so that'll pull it in on its own. Wrap nice and tight where it's got a contour. And then over the joint itself, pull it in. Voila, let that cool for a few minutes, we'll make the thigh course. While the joints are cooling, Patrick will cut out a piece of silicone polyethylene, an 1/8 inch thick, maybe even thinner. Yeah, probably 330 seconds of silicone polyethylene. It's very thin, very flimsy, very flexible, but you must remember, once it's donned on the thigh and cinched up with the Velcro closures, it's very firm. So she doesn't need to wear much. Plus, sitting in a chair is extremely comfortable. Take off the ace bandage. Of course, the joints are going to drop at this point. Put them back where they belong. Okay, get a nylon. Now what happened is, of course, the nylon will allow an air passage for the vacuum system, but it will also prevent the silicone polyethylene from pulling around the joint so much that the plastic will pop from the vacuum. You don't want that to happen either. So you can see the alignment of the joints. Everything is square. Doesn't have to even be perfect because remember, you're working with a plastic joint. The alignment of the joints isn't that critical, but you want them as square as possible. And these are actually, the joints are actually placed over the axis of the ankle joint. So it's really not in line with the line of progression because of tibial torsion. But what will happen is at least the foot will swing in line with the line of progression even though the joints are not in line with the knee's axis as it was anatomically, because now you're working with a foot instead of a knee. So you want to place the joints in line with the ankle joint axis so that they run smoothly against the body. The joint axis is. That shows you your tibial torsion right there. You notice the rotation at the heel? That's normal because you turn the foot into a knee. Ready? By the way, this material we formed at 200 degrees. That's why it's nice and slick. It doesn't take too much of an imprint from the stocking or anything like that. At the end, we're actually going to leave the silicone over the copolymer joint axis because we're going to peel it away, rivet it together, and then leave the silicone over it so it covers even the copper rivet. So that'll actually become a joint cover. Notice the lateral side is higher, as it should be. The medial side is lower. We're actually going to trim this down to about here at the end, and it's going to trim up to about here on the lateral side. But this is going to be very nice and comfortable. The insert's applied back in the socket, and you can see where the joint axis is. Now we're just very simply going to burn a hole through the insert and through the socket, revealing the joint axis on the outside of the socket, okay? Keep it square. Don't get nervous. Now we took it apart again. We have our joint axes, and now we can determine our trim lines, okay? Of course, to allow comfort in sitting, you still have to go down 3 inches from the joint axis, and that tells us where the posterior trim line is going to be. Even though it's a foot, even though that's the instep of the foot, you still have to get that distance to allow comfort when sitting. And we'll start there. We may even lower it. And this is old theory in prosthetics. And actually it's from orthotics, that theory. When you did long leg braces years ago, that's where that band had to be. The bands had to be at least 3 inches above and below the knee so that they weren't impinging the posterior aspect of the knee when the patient sits. Alright, so there's your trim lines. We'll start with that, trim it out, polish it, and then trim the insert to fit. I'm just going to cut the excess away. We really don't care about the lower section. This will all be waste. And we'll draw the trim lines out on this thigh corset. Cut it out and polish it. Before we draw the trim lines, we'll drill the holes through the uprights, which will be the way to connect the silicone polyethylene to the copolymer, and also an attachment for the straps. Leave out there, and on the lateral side around there. So that strap is going to go on an angle like this. Okay? The next hole we want as close to the heel as possible for some support. And we'll say put it there, and directly across, put it there. And then one in the center. Not that complicated. No need to measure. By the way, since we work with thermoplastics, we have probes all different angles. You just buy these from any hardware store. Probes all different angles. Look, hook-shaped, straight, slight angles, sharp angles, straight, thicker ones, thinner ones. And by having this collection of probes, you can pretty much melt anything you want. So in this case, I'm going to use this one. Makes it easy. What I'm going to do is now probe through these holes and melt it first before we drill it. There's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, it helps me to center the hole, and number 2, it'll actually melt the nylon, because otherwise the drill will pick up the nylon stockinette and fray it inside. It doesn't really hurt it, but it's neater this way. Now you center it, don't shake. Shirt off and you're posing on your head with the shirt off and your little nipples touching your. What did he say, Vito?
I gotta take a picture too. You're hot.
Have the trim lines lower on the medial side. Alright. Now again, go up to 3 inches for the thigh corset. So here's the joint axis. Gotta go 3 inches for the thigh corset. Become a joint cover. Keep it low in here. And there's your trim lines. Of course, we're going to use the seam for the opening. When you're forming this, you want to keep the seam nice and straight. Now, of course, I missed my line here, but it doesn't matter, because if you look at the joints, it's going to look just fine. You see my rivets here? That's going to attach the strap. So I need to make this trim line lower, so it's covered by the strap. Okay, so we're going to put it around here for now. Because that's your strap. Now you have enough of the tongue of the thigh corset to fit under the strap.